We live in times marked by constant collapses. Environmental crises, wars, pandemics, political instability, misinformation, economic collapses, existential crises. For many, the feeling is clear. The world is crumbling. And in the face of this avalanche of unpredictable and painful events, a deeply human question arises: how to maintain sanity when everything seems on the brink of collapse? This is not a new concern. Albert Camus, an Algerian philosopher and writer, faced some of the darkest periods in modern history: the Nazi occupation in France, World War II, the threat of nuclear annihilation. Camus witnessed a world in ruins, and yet he did not succumb to despair. On the contrary, he built a profoundly subversive philosophy on how to survive psychologically when the world loses its footing. A philosophy that can still save minds on the verge of collapse today. Camus called this vision absurdism. For him, true human suffering lies not only in the tragedies that befall us, but in the desperate attempt to give absolute meaning to a universe that simply has no intrinsic meaning. According to Camus, conflict arises precisely from this collision between the human need for meaning and the indifferent silence of the world. And it is at this point that many people go mad, trying to force a logic, an explanation, a purpose where perhaps none exists. But Camus did not propose nihilism. He did not suggest that nothing matters and that we should simply give up. Nor did he advocate the comfortable escape of denial, as toxic optimists do, insisting that everything will be fine without facing reality. Camus saw these two responses, denial and nihilism, as direct paths to alienation and madness. Instead, he presented a third way: absurd revolt. A stance that fully accepts chaos and the absence of cosmic meaning, but chooses, nonetheless, to live with dignity, act with compassion, and find beauty in small things. In this video, we will explore how Camus' philosophy of the absurd can help us maintain lucidity amid collapse. We will understand why trying to comprehend the why of tragedies can be a mental trap. We will observe, through the work The Plague, how practical solidarity can be a psychological anchor in times of crisis. And we will investigate what it means, in practice, to live with sanity in an insane world, not as an escape, but as resistance. This is not a video with easy answers. This is an invitation to a new way of existing in the face of chaos. An invitation to stop seeking salvation outside oneself and start cultivating an internal stance of courage, presence, and integrity. Camus reminds us that even amid the ashes, the way you choose to behave defines your sanity and your humanity. If you feel that the world is in ruins, you are right. But that does not mean you have to crumble along with it. In a world driven by algorithms, conspiracy theories, and inflammatory rhetoric that promise definitive explanations for everything, the idea that the universe simply makes no sense may seem not only uncomfortable, but dangerous. But it is precisely here that Albert Camus plants his most radical seed. According to him, human insanity begins the moment we demand from life a coherence that it never promised to offer. Most people live in search of answers. We want to know why horrible things happen. We want to believe that there is a plan, that there is justice, that all suffering is part of something greater. This search for meaning is understandable. It is human. However, Camus argues that it is precisely this expectation that the world should make sense that leads us to despair. Because reality most of the time is brutally indifferent. The universe does not respond. Suffering is random. Death is certain. And there is no manual. At the center of the philosophy of the absurd is this collision. On one side, the human being desiring meaning, purpose, explanation. On the other, a silent, indifferent, chaotic universe. This chasm between desire and reality is what Camus calls the absurd. But contrary to what one might think, this realization is not a sentence of despair. On the contrary, it is the beginning of real freedom. Because when you stop demanding that life obey a logic, you cease to be a slave to frustration. When you accept that not everything has a hidden reason, you free yourself from the guilt of not being able to find answers. Liberation happens the moment you understand that suffering is not a punishment, that pain does not need justification, that chaos does not need to be fixed for you to live with integrity. It is at this point that Camus confronts not only dogmatic religiosity, which promises comfort in exchange for obedience, but also extreme rationalism, which believes it can map all the mysteries of existence with logic and science. Both paths, for him, fall into the same trap: the refusal to accept the absurd as part of the human condition. Recognizing the absurd does not mean giving up on life. It means stopping the search for an external meaning and starting to build significance from one's own experience. You do not live because life has a defined purpose. You live despite the absence of purpose. And this is the deepest affirmation of freedom that a human being can make. But not everyone can cope with this truth without becoming unbalanced. In the face of the absurd, many choose to deny. Others surrender to nihilism. And it is about these two paths and their devastating effects on mental sanity that we will talk about next. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. When the world seems to be crumbling, whether due to a devastating personal crisis or cascading global collapses, the human mind tends to react in a predictable, almost automatic way. Camus observed that in the face of absurdity and chaos, most people follow two distinct paths. Both seem to offer immediate relief, but deep down they are mental traps that lead to psychic fragmentation and ultimately madness. The first path is denial. It is the refusal to accept that something terrible is happening. People in this state cling to the illusion of normalcy, minimize risks, hide behind automatic routines, as if ignoring the problem were the same as solving it. They repeat empty mantras like, "It will pass. This is an exaggeration. It has always been this way." This refusal to confront horror creates a parallel reality, comfortable but false. In the long run, this denial comes at a cost: chronic anxiety, emotional stagnation, unexpected collapses when the fantasy can no longer be sustained. It is the mind silently screaming, suffocated by compulsive positivity. The second path is nihilism. Here, the person looks into the abyss and decides that nothing is worth it. Nothing matters, everything is an illusion, the world is lost, and living becomes just an empty wait for death. It is a total surrender to despair, a giving up on the human. Nihilism is cold, corrosive, and disguises itself as lucidity. I am a realist. I no longer delude myself. But behind this mask is a paralyzing pain. The nihilist has not found the truth. They have merely been swallowed by it. It is a form of slow suicide, where the body survives, but the soul departs. Camus was relentless with these two postures. For him, both represent a refusal to deal with the absurd in a healthy way. Both the denier and the nihilist are, in fact, fleeing from reality, one through blind optimism, the other through absolute despair. Both become ill because they try to escape what needs to be faced: the fact that life offers no guarantees, no justice, no prefabricated meaning. But Camus proposes a third way, more difficult, more demanding, but profoundly transformative. A stance that neither denies horror nor surrenders to it. A way of living that confronts chaos with open eyes and still chooses to resist. This path is called by Camus the absurd revolt. And it is about this that we will talk now. What does it mean to revolt against the absurd? How is it possible to act with dignity when nothing guarantees that your actions will make a difference? The answer begins with a radical shift in perspective. In the face of the absurd, the absence of universal meaning, and the inevitability of pain, Camus proposes something that seems contradictory at first glance: to revolt. But this revolt is not a destructive scream, nor a desperate rebellion. It is an act of consciousness, an existential stance, a deeply human form of resistance. For Camus, the absurd revolt is the decision to face reality exactly as it is, tragic, unpredictable, indifferent, and yet to choose to act with courage, lucidity, and dignity. The revolted individual does not await divine salvation, does not expect a reward in the future, nor lives in search of definitive answers. He understands that the universe is silent, but instead of remaining silent, he decides to respond with action. The absurd revolt is a yes to life, even knowing that it offers no guarantees. It is waking up every morning accepting that nothing is assured, and still doing what needs to be done. It is suffering without wanting to transform that suffering into an illusory narrative of greater purpose, but also without allowing it to destroy his capacity to create, love, resist, and care. Camus defines this stance as fidelity to oneself in the face of chaos. It is not a blind hope that everything will get better. It is a profound refusal to let horror define who you become. The revolted individual maintains integrity even when the world loses its. He acts not because he will win, but because he needs to remain human. In this sense, the absurd revolt is a supreme form of freedom. When you stop demanding that life deliver meaning to you, you gain the freedom to construct your own, not as a universal truth, but as a personal act of resistance. Small actions, conscious gestures, deliberate choices, each of these attitudes is an act of revolt against the absurd. Living in this revolt does not mean eliminating pain, but preventing it from turning into dehumanization. It does not mean denying destruction, but refusing to be destroyed internally. It is living with intensity, knowing that nothing is eternal. And precisely for that reason, every moment matters. But how does this revolt take shape in the real world amidst collective collapse? How does it manifest not only in the individual mind, but in concrete actions, especially when suffering affects everyone? To understand this, Camus delivers one of his most powerful works, The Plague. In the next part, we will see how, amidst an epidemic that devastated an entire city, the absurd revolt transformed into silent solidarity, into duty without hope, into conscious humanity, and paradoxically, into a form of inner salvation. In The Plague, Albert Camus does not offer a gentle or comforting metaphor. He immerses us in a city besieged by death, isolated by fear, consumed by a plague that spares neither the innocent nor the guilty. Oran, the setting of the narrative, is an ordinary city, monotonous, trade-oriented, accustomed to routine, until suddenly it finds itself paralyzed by an invisible evil. And it is in this scenario of absolute collapse that Camus puts into practice his philosophy of the absurd, not as theory, but as concrete experience. What makes The Plague so powerful is that the characters do not overcome tragedy. They do not find a magical cure, do not discover a higher purpose hidden in suffering, do not escape horror. On the contrary, many die, others go mad, and all are forced to confront the worst in themselves. And yet, or perhaps because of this, some characters choose to get up every day and keep fighting, not because they will win, but because they refuse to betray what makes them human. Dr. Rieu, the central character of the story, is the embodiment of absurd revolt. He does not believe in divine explanations nor in miracles. He knows he cannot eradicate the plague, but he continues to treat patients day after day, knowing that most will die. He does this not out of hope, but out of integrity. Because there is a profound difference between hoping that everything will be fine and deciding to do good, even knowing that the world may never improve. That is the heart of Camus's message. Acting with compassion and responsibility does not depend on the certainty that it will work out. Authentic kindness is that which endures even when no one is watching, even when no one will thank you, even when evil seems to prevail. Sanity in this context is not a comfortable mental state. It is a daily achievement built on ethical actions in a scenario without guarantees. In one of the most striking moments of the work, Camus writes that the only way to fight the plague is with honesty. And what is honesty here, if not the recognition that life is fragile, that suffering is real, and that despite this, we can still choose to alleviate someone's pain? A gesture of care, an act of listening, a repeated effort even in despair. These are the purest manifestations of sanity in times of collapse. The plague also reveals another uncomfortable truth. Waiting for a return to normalcy can be more dangerous than the tragedy itself. Many people in Oran become psychologically ill not because of the plague itself, but because they live in the expectation that everything will return to how it was before. They place their sanity in an idealized future, and in doing so, abandon the present, where life is still happening. Camus invites us to do exactly the opposite, to abandon illusory hope and embrace radical presence. It is not about being optimistic. It is about being whole, about making oneself available to what is real, about building meaning with one's own hands, even if it does not last, even if it does not save the whole world. But how to live like this day by day, how to transform this philosophy into personal practice when reality seems overwhelming, how to maintain emotional clarity when everything around insists on collapsing. Camus' answer lies not in theory, but in everyday action. And that is exactly what we will explore in the next part. How to find sanity through small acts, conscious choices, and a personal ethic of resistance. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. Sanity for Camus is not a state of permanent balance, nor an unshakable peace of mind. In a world where suffering is inevitable and meaning is not guaranteed, sanity becomes an act of daily resistance. And this resistance does not manifest in grand heroic gestures or transcendent revelations. It happens in the ordinary, in acts of compassion, in moments of beauty, and in ethical choices made even when no one is watching. Camus teaches us that amidst hell, it is possible and necessary to create moments of humanity. A sincere conversation, a silent help, a gesture of kindness made without an audience. These are the small moments that anchor us when the world seems to crumble. They do not change the world, but they change the way we inhabit the world. That is why aesthetics, ethics, and empathy are deeply intertwined in the philosophy of the absurd. The absurd does not require you to believe in something greater. It requires you to act as if your presence here, now, matters. Not because there will be a reward, but because that is how one remains whole. In practice, this means looking around and asking, what is still within my reach? When everything seems out of control, the way to maintain sanity is to redirect focus to what you can still touch. You cannot end the war, but you can comfort someone who suffers. You cannot fix the system, but you can be honest in your relationships. You cannot guarantee that everything will get better, but you can be kind now. Camus never romanticizes suffering. He does not believe that pain makes us better, but he strongly asserts that it is in how we react to pain that we define our character. True freedom is not doing what one wants, but choosing how to act in the face of what cannot be controlled. And this choice, though silent, is revolutionary, because it is in this choice that dignity resides. In The Plague, we see characters finding moments of genuine joy, a conversation on the terrace, a song, a shared memory. These moments do not negate the horror, but they function as micro-resistances, small sparks that reaffirm, I am still here and I am still human. This awareness that it is possible to sustain beauty even in chaos is what prevents horror from taking over completely. Camus also points out that it is possible to find pleasure, even a form of rebellious joy, in the simple act of continuing to walk. In the myth of Sisyphus, he writes, one must imagine Sisyphus happy. Happy not because he found meaning, but because he continued to push the boulder, because he made the very act an affirmation of life. And it is precisely at this point that Camus delivers his deepest lesson. The world may be in ruins, but you can still choose who you will be within that hell. And this choice, though small, can save your sanity, and perhaps even your soul. But this frightening freedom to choose amidst chaos raises a final question. What is the true role of lucidity in dark times? In the final part, we will explore how the radical acceptance of reality transforms into the only genuine form of freedom, and why, for Camus, sanity is, above all, a form of courageous lucidity. We have reached the most essential point of Camus' philosophy. Sanity, in an absurd world, is not a gift, it is an achievement. And this achievement requires more than emotional resilience. It demands brutal lucidity, a rare intellectual courage, and an unwavering willingness to look reality in the eye without blinking. Camus does not offer consolation. He does not believe in comforting lies, nor in anesthetic hopes. He proposes something much harder, but infinitely more authentic, to accept that the world has no prefabricated meaning and yet choose to live with integrity, awareness, and profound humanity. This is the ultimate rebellion, a rebellion without weapons, without guarantees, without promises of redemption, but a rebellion that protects the only thing that can still be protected when everything around crumbles: your lucidity. Lucidity is the opposite of the emotional blindness that leads to denial. It is also the antidote to paralyzing nihilism. To be lucid is not to be pessimistic. It is to be honest. It is to recognize that life is fragile, that death is certain, that injustice exists, and that nonetheless, it is possible to build something worthy among the ruins. Camus says, "Freedom is worth no more than anything else, but I know nothing better." Sanity is that freedom, the ability to choose how you will live, even when you did not choose the world you were born into. To be lucid is to live knowing that tragedy is part of existence, but refusing to be consumed by it. It is to find strength, not in the illusion that everything will get better, but in the intimate commitment that, as long as you are here, you will be an agent of good, truth, and beauty, even if only for a few seconds, even if no one sees, even if the world never changes. This is the absurd revolt taken to its peak. A mental and spiritual state in which, even without hopes of salvation, you continue. Not out of faith, but by choice. The choice not to allow horror to define who you are. The choice to keep your mind awake, your heart open, and your feet firm. In the end, this is true sanity. If you have made it this far, you probably feel, just as Camus felt, that the world is off-kilter, that something is broken, not just out there, but also within. Now I ask you, how do you choose to respond to this collapse? Comment below. What has been your greatest internal battle to maintain sanity lately? Share this video with someone who is feeling lost, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We still have much to discuss, and before you go, watch the next video. It is as important as this one, maybe even more. And you know, sometimes All we need is a new idea to keep going.